Welcome to The Thing About Austen, a podcast about Jane Austen's world. I'm Zan.
And I'm Diane. And this episode, we're talking about Miss Lambe. We are thrilled to welcome back our guest, Damianne Scott. Dami is a writer, teacher, and the Janeite behind the popular online community space Black Girl Loves Jane. Dami has been a presenter for Jane Austen and Company's Race and Regency series, the Jane Austen Society of India, and the Jane Austen Summer Program 2021. In 2024, she presented at the JASNA AGM with her talk, Do You Dream of Austen in Color? Inviting People of Color Fully into the Janehood. Her work on Austen has been published in JASNA's Persuasions Online Journal and in the essay collection Retelling Jane Austen. Dami is also an advocate for celebrating and encouraging diversity in variations and adaptations of Austen and other classic literature. Welcome, Dami!
Hello!
I should say welcome back.
I know,
Thank
it's good to
you.
talk to you again.
For this episode, we are taking a look at Sanditon, one of Austen's unfinished works. So we only have a fragment of this novel, but there's a lot packed into those dozen chapters. We have been introduced to the Parker family and their guest, Charlotte Haywood, and we are learning about the aspiring resort town of Sanditon and meeting some of its denizens and promoters. Definitely the promoters.
The promoters are working hard.
Yes, they are working hard. Diana Parker, who has essentially appointed herself the town property manager and Airbnb consultant, is on the lookout for accommodations for a Mrs. Griffiths who is considering coming to Sanditon, but has some hesitations.
Okay, so this is coming from Diana Parker. The reason of this hesitation was her having no connections in the place and no means of ascertaining that she should have good accommodations on arriving there. And she was particularly careful and scrupulous on all those matters, more on account of a certain Miss Lambe, a young lady, probably a niece, under her care, than on her own account or her daughter's. Miss Lambe has an immense fortune, richer than all the rest, and very delicate health. So that is our profile of Miss Lambe. That's what we're given.
And yet it's leaving out so much because it really doesn't reflect all that Miss Lambe is and what she represents, not only in that time, but what can she represent now. So
Yeah. It's so sparse, and yet there's so
Yes.
much more going on, right?
uh-huh.
As is so often the case with Austen, she's actually embedding quite a bit in that very brief description. So, Dami, can you help us unpack this a bit more? What's going on with Miss Lambe here?
Well, first and foremost, Miss Lambe, though it's not said in that passage, what we know about Miss Lambe is that she's from the West Indies. And we know that she is a mulatto. And if our listeners don't know what a mulatto is, it's a mixture of European heritage. And in this case, she would have been a mixture of Eurocentric relatives and African descent. And because she is the richest one there, that means the mixture of wealth is coming from her father's side. And her mother would have the African ancestry in her. And it's not just half. Usually that means she, or at least how it's described, I believe in the book, she is like half of half. So she's like a quarter African ancestry. And then the rest of it's coming from her Eurocentric side, her father's grandfather's side. So she is rich based off of the wealth her father and grandfather accumulated by owning her mom or owning her relatives. And we can then go kind of, if you want to play this, because again, we don't know, Austen didn't finish it, but we could kind of continue on why she's so sickly. I mean, like every chapter, I was reading it, almost every instance that they mention her, and she's only mentioned from like 9 to 12 in the chapters.
Right.
So we don't even have her until chapter 9.
Yeah. And she doesn't have any speaking lines.
And she has no speaking lines. She has no voice. She don't have a first name. She's just Miss Lambe, who's very sickly or very delicate in health and rich.
Yep.
That's it.
Yeah. But like those two things are the things that we really come down on a lot in this narrative.
Right. She's rich and she's very sickly. And that sickness, we could interpret, because again, this is, we're just interpreting because Austen didn't finish it, could be a representation of the sickness of where she's coming from. It could be a sickness of how she was birthed into this society. It could be a sickness at the fact that they've shipped her off to get married, find some man to marry her and all her wealth. I mean, so because that sickness idea, why are we pushing that so much? Why are we pushing her health so much? So it kind of makes you kind of want to, wonder again why this is how we describe her.
Right.
Why is Austen pushing this? And there could be a plethora of reasons.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard, right, with this, because we're dealing with a fragment, right? And so we do kind of have to get into the realm of speculation where it's like, we have Austen introducing this character and we don't really know for sure what direction
she's going to do with her.
Yeah. Where was she going to go with this character? Yeah. Let's talk about that.
Well, I mean, I was trying to figure this out too. So we know she wrote Mansfield Park, I believe, in 1814, right? And I was trying to think about what was going on in England roughly during this time, right? So Mansfield Park is published in 1814. We know that it's talking about, in some degrees, about slavery, about Antigua. We know the wealth of Mansfield Park is coming from the plantations in Antigua. What's happening in England during that time, like in 1807, slavery is ended in England as far as the Middle Passage, people going to Africa, then bringing them to the West Indies or America. That's ended. And then in 1833, after the abolishment of slavery, period, everywhere for England, there was also, underneath that abolishment of slavery, there was going to be some compensation for those slave owners who owned slaves or enslaved people in the West Indies. They were going to get some money, right? And that money was then paid to banks and annuities and things that people even in 2015 in England were still getting money from. And the fact that the Center of the Study of the Legacy of British Slavery said that 1 to 2.5% of the wealth of England today is still linked to the annuities that they gained from the end of slavery. So here you have, so going back to Sanditon and Miss Lambe, she is coming from a family that's wealth is going to have an impact on British society.
Yeah.
They already had an impact on British society. They probably have a Mansfield Park of their own in England during that time. And just the impact that she was carrying and what that meant for her marriage market and everything like that was huge. Yeah. And I think Austen wanted to play with that, not only with race, but I think also the social dynamics that still were going to come from that. The social, the economic, women's rights, colonialism, all that then becomes wrapped up in the embodiment of Miss Lambe.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
therefore she's sick because maybe the society that she's been produced into is sick as well. How they treat women, how they treat people of color, how they treat the countries that they're colonizing and imperializing. All those things are coming into play, and maybe Austen wanted to play with that as well into the embodiment of Miss Lambe.
I think the setting of the novel does a lot of that kind of contextual work, like framing exactly what you're talking about, Dami, but like the fact that it is a seaside resort, right? The fact that there's that connection to, obviously, sea voyages being very loaded.
Yes.
But that it also is a resort for health, again, that kind of metaphor that you've evoked here really effectively. But I think one of the biggest things that comes up, especially at the beginning of Sanditon, before we're introduced to Miss Lambe, is the economics of Sanditon. Like, economics are like everything to these people. And so knowing that she is the wealthiest
Right.
woman that's coming to town that will also complicate narratives of marriage, narratives of health, narratives of wealth.
Yes.
I mean, I don't want to reduce Miss Lambe's presence to just a narrative device because that's not fair. But if just talking on that level, that's an incredibly loaded thing for Austen to just embed so early,
Right.
in this scrap. Yeah.
Right. Right. And the thing about it is, because it's such, I mean, what's happening with Sanditon, the town, is they're trying to make money, right? They're trying to, and they want the wealthiest, they want the most well-known to come and infuse money into the city itself.
I mean, they are thirsty.
I mean,
they are thirsty for development.
Right? They're thirsty for development. They want the richest people to come. And the richest person that comes is the one that they probably would outcast the most, except for one thing. She's got the most money.
She's got the money. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, early in the scrap as well, we get a whole passage about, they're speculating about how West Indian patrons are particularly desirable. But then they also embed the whole, like, but what if they spike prices? And it's so overt. Again, that, had Austen continued with this, she wasn't, this is the Chekhov's gun phenomenon. She's not going to just let that lay there.
Right.
She's going to do something with that. She's very much so front-loading the economic factor of Miss Lambe as this incredibly complex piece.
Right. And she's kind of the embodiment of all that, right? Miss Lambe is not just thrown in there by any means just to be another one of the sub characters who's going to be either for comic relief, even though I do think it's humorous that they keep saying she's sick, but she's got money, but she's sick, but that her embodiment is a representation of what's happening in all of England at that time. And the fact that she has no voice, but that she has money.
And the money's doing all the talking.
And the money's doing all the talking. Where Mrs. Griffiths is running around trying to do things for her, trying to get her. Oh, she went to the baths today. She went here today. She went there, because, of her delicate health, And of course, Lady Denham, who wants her son to meet Miss Lambe so she can so he can marry her, basically, because, And how, how Lady Denham is waiting for her and trying to give her advice on how to feel better. And all that is catering to this woman that has no name, no voice, sickly again. We're going to probably say that a lot. Sickly again, but
it can't be mentioned too many times, right?
Because they mentioned it. I mean, but has this huge amount of money. So I don't think that Austen was trying to be or trying to walk around the discussion. I think she tried to start it in Mansfield Park about the social manners, of course, that was going on, but also just the economic things that were happening with England and the landowners that were there and those who had property in the West Indies. But I think she really was going to really have this discussion about England and where they're getting the money from.
I mean, Austen is always obsessed with the economics.
Right.
Like, it's foundational.
In every novel, she's talking about the money. Who has it? Who doesn't?
Who wants it?
Who wants it? What they're willing to do to get it. So she's always interested in the money. And then what is now pushing in further is now this idea of race. And let's talk about it. In Mansfield Park, we didn't really talk about it. We had this whole silence thing going on when Fanny Price asked about it. We're going to have to talk about it because now I got this mulatto girl walking around here who's got the most money. So we got to talk about it. How she got that money, who's going to get that money if she dies, because again, she's sickly, or, who's going to marry into that money.
Right. And you're pointing out this, and it's making me think of the fact that there's, marriage obviously being so contractual. Marriage plots are always so very heavy with metaphor, right? With this idea of what is the contract? Who's the advantage, disadvantage. And marriage inherently in this time period disadvantages women. Just full stop. There's no debate on that.
Mm-hmm.
And so with her coming in with the power dynamic of the money, but knowing that the moment she gets in any marriage contract, all of that power
goes away,
leaves Miss Lambe, is also, again, something that Austen would be
very aware of.
Very aware of. And so it's interesting, again, because one of the tropes of Austen is also, can we find marriage with couples who are actually like mentally and emotionally and like personally linked, or does it have to be the society thing?
Right.
And I think with Miss Lambe, I think it really, of course, all of us wish that we could have more Austen and see where she was going with this. But I do think that there is no doubt she would have foregrounded that in a way that makes this idea of contract be really, really foundational.
But also, I guess I would hope is that Austen would explore to some degree how she got the power. How does she get this money? Because again, Austen makes it known she is a mulatto. So she's not some young Eurocentric girl who was born in Antigua or wherever she was in the West Indies. She identifies Miss Lambe because she wants you to know she is not like the rest. She's not like any of these other young women who are either looking for some man to marry or are the prey of some man who needs them to marry them so that they can get wealth. There's a point for why she mentions that. How that was going to further, that is, of course, up to now our interpretations. But she makes it a point to make it known. I know later on, just William Thackeray, he wrote in Vanity Fair, one of his characters was a mulatto, but they were throwing her at the men because she had the money. Marry her. We don't care about that. So before any other race, it's green. So we don't care what other skin color you are. Green is the most important. So if you got the money, we will deal with the other, portion later. There is evidence, both fictional-wise as well as in reality, of people from the West Indies, from South Asia, who go to England because of their wealth, marry someone from England and tend to blend in or tend to fare in. So Miss Lambe's story is not a unique story in a sense. It's not a unique story by any means, but it does also is a story that kind of promotes this idea that yes, there were people of color back then, right? And Austen, she had to know of it so that she could write it. So what Miss Lambe's character does for us today, why I think she's so important for today, is because it makes Janeites of today and fans of Jane Austen understand that people of color were back then there. Austen was aware of that. And so it's okay to talk about what was happening with people of color back then. And it's okay to welcome people of color in your different societies now, because Austen was aware of people of color and she was dealing with what people of color were dealing with at the time in her own way. I mean, she's not waving a flag saying, in slavery now. She's not doing any of that, but she is having her characters say, hey, tell me about this Antigua thing. Now, what's going on there? She is asking, or I think would ask more questions with Sanditon and with Miss Lambe, like, hey, how you get this money? How did you inherit it? What is your father's place there? What is your mother like? Because, let's face it, let's do social stuff for a minute when we talk about Austen. Your parents, what your parents were just as important, right? Mm-hmm. So when we think about Pride and Prejudice and Dorothy, right? For a minute, it was like, oh, we can never be joined to that family because look, we got Mrs. Bennet over here who's trying to hook up all her daughters and she has bad behavior and bad social, manners. Then we had Mr. Bennett over here who's locked in his office all the time reading books, and he's not doing what he is supposed to be doing to promote his daughters so that they can get married. So this idea of who your family was is just as important in these novels. So why wouldn't we investigate a little bit about who her parents are? Because hopefully she would not be married to Lady Denford's son. Hopefully she might meet somebody who's got some sense and actually wants her for who she
For
is.
herself.
For herself,
Yes.
and not for her money. Maybe she won't be sick at the end, and they can give a new description of who she is. Maybe she will get a voice at the end, but her legacy, or not her legacy, the legacy she comes from would be very important in whether or not that they wanted to marry her. And so, yes, she's got money. That's a huge benefit, to have money. But, well, who is your dad? Does he own land here in England? Where is this land? Is it in Derbyshire? Is it Somerset? Where is his connection? Does he know somebody? Who is your mama? Was she the daughter of an enslaved person? Who was she? I would hope that Austen would do some of that. She does it for all her other characters, giving backgrounds about their families. So I hope she would have did that there.
It would make sense too. It's just like like you've talked a lot about Mansfield Park, and this being sort of a natural progression, right?
Mm-hmm.
From
Yeah.
what she sort of started talking about and the themes she's starting to unpack a little bit in that novel, and now coming to this work, a couple of years later on, those were clearly things that she was thinking about, right? And
Right.
things that were on her mind.
Right.
But I also think that Austen rarely wrote about things she didn't know about. You know what I mean? Like her novels excel because she writes about stuff she understands and she knows. And so while she might not obviously understand what it is to be a person of mixed race, you can tell that she was at least going to go into this story trying to do justice to this dynamic.
She understood about the outsider. So the outsider, you just have to put a different label on it, So she understood, if we think of her characters, Harriet. Harriet is very sweet, funny little woman, but her dad, her natural father, who didn't want her. He didn't want her. He didn't raise her. Harriet's the outsider.
Mm-hmm.
We have Fanny Price, who is, in this case, even though she is the lead, is because she's the outsider. She's the observer of everything that's going on in that house.
And she's the poor relation.
Right. She's the poor relation. And so she's observing everything that's happening in that house. Everything is kind of happening to her. She's not making things happen, or at least in my interpretation of it. Things are happening to her or happening around her. And she's either the recipient of it, the benefit of it, or she's receiving the cost of it, right? So when she doesn't marry Henry Crawford, they send her packing, right? So,
Yep.
I mean, think about how much nicer Aunt Norris would have been to her if she would have been rich.
right.
Undeniable.
Can you imagine? Because that's the only thing that Aunt Norris cares about is money.
She's not even nice to her own sister, and that's her sister's daughter, right? Because they're poor. So I think Austen writes about the outsider. And now the outsider in this case is Miss Lambe. And what makes her the outsider? Well, it's not because she doesn't have money like Fanny Price, or that she doesn't know what we're assuming, because we only, again, have 12 chapters, that she doesn't know who her parents are, like Harriet, but she is the outsider because of that. She's an outsider because, one, her health, to some degree, because of who's going to Sanditon, but going there partly to get better, to feel better, but also because of her race. She's going to be the only one who looks like her in that town. She's the only one.
And on top of that, also just being an outsider by virtue of literally being like a visitor to this town. Like, she doesn't live there year round.
Visitor
Right.
to this town. And the richest one, which puts her in a strange dynamic because she doesn't look like them. They will treat her with civility, but they will not treat her with kindness. And they're treating her with civility because of money, not because she's a human being.
I think that actually is a really excellent way to kind of talk about the way that Sanditon has this heritage that's gone beyond
Yes.
Austen. So So Sanditon has been finished by multiple authors.
Yes.
But the most famous recently is obviously the most recent miniseries.
Yes.
So can you talk to us a little bit about the miniseries and how they incorporated Miss Lambe into the narrative and share some of your own thoughts on that particular portrayal of Miss Lambe?
Okay, well, the biggest thing that they do, that Andrew Davies does, is he gives her a name. Her name is Georgiana Lambe. Now, in the essay that I did for retelling Austen, I talked about how even with her name, though, her name is very Eurocentric.
And it's George, like King George.
King
like
George, right. It's very Eurocentric. It's not a name that would have been given to someone who lived among the people in West Indies. That is not the name they would have given her. So that's one thing. But they do give her a name, and they give her a voice. Okay, so she's very feisty. She's a very feisty individual. She is not sickly. She's feisty. She has her own mind. She has been brought to Sanditon by Sydney Parker. There's no Mrs. Griffiths. There's no other females that are coming with her. But she has been brought by Sydney Parker because they are trying to get her married off. Her father does not like who she has fallen in love with, who is an abolitionist, somewhat an abolitionist. And so they are separated. I think he also there's some other conniving things that are going on. So if you want to know, you need to look at the show. But they send her to Sanditon with Sydney Parker as her, like, quote unquote babysitter. And she has a voice, she has a mouth. So when Lady D, in the show, she throws a banquet or a dinner to celebrate Georgiana Lambe's arrival to the Sanditon community. And hey, this is my son. And, let's get this marriage thing going. And she's like, no, marriage is like enslavement or something to that effect. And Lady D is like, well, I would think you would be aware of the benefits of marriage / slavery, because of your background. And Miss Lambe was like, are you crazy? And then to emphasize again the craziness of the fact that you wanting to marry this woman who is a mulatto, who has been birthed out of the atrocities of slavery, you bring up in the show. You bring a pineapple to the table. And so pineapples represent, in the West Indies, welcome. It's a welcoming fruit. They use it a lot for welcoming. And it's an exotic fruit. So anything back in that day, if it came to England, it was a pineapple. It was expensive. It was meant for the wealthy. It was meant to show off wealth. And so in the series, she brings this pineapple to the table that she's been saving for 5 years.
It's a long time.
It's a long time. And when they cut it open after this conversation that Lady D and Miss Lambe have, maggots come out as a representation, I believe Andrew Davies was doing, as a representation of the rottenness that is happening in the English society at this time with colonialism and imperialism, that you want our stuff. You want the foreignness, the exoticness of the West Indies. So you want that pineapple. And in this case, you want Miss Lambe. Particularly, you want her money. But how you go about it is rotten. Rotten to the core. And I think it's a sign of the rottenness of what's happening in Great Britain. So I do like Miss Lambe in that sense, that she has a voice and she stands her mind. But I think they forgot about her. Particularly in our first season, because she becomes a side, and other people have written about this too. I'm just kind of a side piece for Charlotte, right?
Yeah.
Because Charlotte is, we believe to be, the main character in Sanditon, So she becomes like the sidekick of Charlotte in the series, and kind of the one that tries to get Charlotte together with whatever man she's supposed to get together. In the show, it's first Sydney Parker, but then Sydney Parker dies, and then she hooks up with someone else. But they treat Miss Lambe kind of like what I would call the typical stereotypical person of color character, where the Black person is not the lead, the Black person is the sidekick, helping the white lead find love, give some wisdom to, take care of them, kind of thing.
She becomes like the smart bestie.
Yeah, she's the bestie.
Like giving you
she's the
advice.
Black bestie of Charlotte. So it goes in a sense the same stereotypical thing that other things in Hollywood kind of does.
Right.
All the time. They try to redeem her in season 3, and it ends with her finding some kind of happiness along with Charlotte at the end. But I did appreciate that he acknowledged that we're going to have to talk about it. We have to talk about colonialism and racism and slavery that Austen lived in during this time. That Miss Lambe was written in the book for a reason. We're going to use this particularly to discuss that. And then we'll move on from it because we can, because there's other things to do. But we're going to talk about it. We're not going to push it under the rug. And so I do appreciate that. So for that, just for the maggot thing, that was worth the price of admission right there. Well, it wasn't worth because it's surprising. But it's also just like, well, how do you keep a pineapple for 5 years?
Yeah, like what did you expect?
What did you expect? Like it was gonna, I think it was like preserved or tried to be preserved and encased but like, what did you expect? Like, why are you serving this to people? Like, really?
Yeah.
She's like, I've had this in my Regency Tupperware for 5 years.
Waiting to entertain you.
It's interesting how, I think that's true of so many of the Austen adaptations. Like, people start taking things, like everybody just assumes now that Marianne was out wandering in the rain and then she collapsed and Brandon had to go pick her up because it happened in 2 adaptations, even though it never happens in the book. But I think Sanditon in particular is like, this adaptation has really become, because a lot of people have never read it or they read it once like 20 years ago. This adaptation is, I think, for a lot of people, like how they are
their access point.
Yes. This is their access point for this novel fragment.
Yes, it is their access point. And so I think, well, the article I wrote for Jasna talks about the pineapple because pineapple became the symbol for Sanditon in the series. And they were using it as something cutesy, like, the love between Sydney and Charlotte just can't be denied. And then they have an emoji with a pineapple. And I'm like, with others, like, did you miss the significance of what that pineapple was supposed to represent? Right? So pineapples were more than just supposed to be some cutesy thing. They really represented the colonialism that was happening. And so some people were complaining, like, why are you using, me included, why are you using this pineapple as the symbol of this little romance? Because really you're caring about, because most people had not read the novel, you're caring about this romance between Sydney Parker and Charlotte. In the book, we don't even know if they're going to even get together. We don't even know if they like each other. But you're worried about this romance that you have missed the most important part, at least for one episode of this series. You have missed the most important part, that Great Britain was in the midst of a colonial and imperialism situation. And here Andrew Davies is trying to make a commentary about it with this pineapple being rotten to the core, this love of exoticism, and yet not being in love with the people that grew the pineapple or plowed the pineapple or, cut down the sugar cane or crafted the tea. You're not in love with the people or the culture of that. You're like segments of it. He's trying to make a huge statement and you are missing it. And to me, it was just another sign that, particularly if you are a true Janeite, not just somebody who's looking at a show to be looking at a show. Because some people are just looking at it's a period piece and I like it, ooh, love romance, and it's got Theo James in it. It's like, oh, yeah. But if you are a Jane fan, a Jane Austen fan, and you didn't want to focus on that period of time in that episode or in that show and what they were trying to say, you're again still saying that you don't want to deal with the reality of where Austen was living at that time and with people of color being there at that time. And that's what makes me then want to say, but that's not the reality, which again is why we have Mansfield Park. Austen was going to deal with it. She deals with it very little. I'm not saying she goes into great push about it, but she does deal with it in Mansfield Park. And I think she would have dealt with it further in Sanditon, because she makes a point to identify who this person is. Miss Lambe could have been anybody. Miss Lambe could have came from anywhere.
Yep.
Miss Lambe could have been Eurocentric and just as sickly, but just as rich. There's a reason why Miss Lambe is a young mulatto lady who's sick, but is wealthier than anybody else. And I think Austen wanted to talk about it. And I think we as lovers of Jane Austen have to talk about it if we want to truly be a part of all the aspects of who Austen is.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
Well put. Agreed. Completely.
Well, Dami, thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you.
on to talk
Yes.
to us about Miss Lambe.
It's a pleasure.
Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Where can our listeners find you online, follow along with your work and everything that you have going on?
They can find me on Black Girl Loves Jane, Facebook. Just type it in, you can find me. They also can find me on Twitter or X or whatever they want to call it today. Black Girl Loves Jane as well. And they can also find me, Black Girl Loves Jane, on Instagram. And if they want to reach out to me, they can email me at blackgirllovesjane@gmail.com.
Perfect.
Well, thank you again, Dami. It is always a pleasure to get to hear your perspective on Austen. So thank you for making time for us again.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Thank you again to Damianne Scott for joining us for this episode. You can find us on Instagram at The Thing About Austen and on our website, thethingaboutaustin.com. You can also email us at thethingaboutaustin@gmail.com, and you can find our merch for the podcast on Redbubble. Go to aboutaustin.redbubble.com.
Stay tuned for next episode when we'll be talking about Harriet as a natural daughter.
Thanks for listening.